Our aim here is to be an exercise in sustainable tourism in village China.
I came across the brickyard at Miriam when searching for eco-hotels in Beijing. What once used to be an old polluting glazed tile factory is now an extraordinary sustainable retreat with hotel, holiday homes, restaurant and spa, right at the foothill of the Great Wall. But what does sustainability really mean, and how did Jim, an American, end up on the Beijing countryside? That's what we're exploring in this video.
We've been in business since the beginning of 2010. We have 25 rooms and suites and 11 village homes that have been renovated to host guests with a total of more than 50 rooms. We're aimed at being ecologically responsible, so we grow a good portion of our own food. We make everything homemade from scratch. We have a whole series of operating principles and practices so that we limit our energy and water usage and also our waste.
When the guests come to stay over here, we provide complimentary grass zippers, so that's also an eco-friendly thing. We don't have like a small shampoos that like in 5-star hotel you get them like, you know, branded shampoos, everything. Here we use eco-friendly shampoos, which is the Shangri-La Farms. We use that. So this is the whole philosophy in every different direction that we use. We don't use plastic around here. This is the whole thing. We recycle our waste over here. We put it in composting. We have a separate wastage thing for recycling items and everything. So we have local people who comes and takes away. That's why even the oil is recycled and everything. That's why.
So I'm sitting here now in front of the vegetable garden of the brickyard of the restaurant. So when you order food, a lot of the vegetables are actually from their own garden.
Here we have so much produce and so much things that grows seasonally and locally around this area that I have this you can say an added advantage that I can think about the menu, but my thinking about the menu is keeping it simple. That's what my thing is. I want ingredient to speak to itself. So we buy fresh items and we serve fresh items.
You can also see sustainability in the designs of this place. It comes both due to the materials used and also to the way the buildings work and function. How do you incorporate sustainability into your designs and into the architecture?
When I look at a design project like the brickyard, sustainability is not simply an afterthought. It's something that I consider from the very beginning. So what does it mean to be sustainable? What materials do you use? Where do you get the materials from? What kind of energy efficiency do you have in the operation? Insulation? How do you make sure there's fresh air? How do you get natural ventilation? How do you get light, natural light into the spaces inside? How do you do this without compromising your aesthetic sense of what the space and the light and the view should be like? And each project has its own set of balances on a continuum. So here at the brickyard, our rooms are not huge. They feel big. I'm the designer of the property, so my aim was to create views and make people feel as if they're very close to nature, and in fact be close to nature while saving energy and not wasting materials. So one thing that I do in my design work is reuse old building materials, and I retain existing buildings and redeploy them. It's called adaptive reuse in the field, and it's very challenging, but it's also very rewarding. So I want to keep an old building and respect the people who built it and remember them, even though the house has moved on to a new period in its use by people.
How would you describe the buildings and the spaces you design?
I design for an aesthetic feeling of unity with nature.
So it's such an interesting place, integration of different cultures, of different types of sustainability and different styles. You might be curious about how it all started.
Our house that we still live in is in Mutenyu village, which is next door on the road that goes up to the formal tourism site. For this section of the wall. It's Mutenyu section of the wall. It's Mutenyu village. And that village has been here since the Ming Dynasty, and the people are the descendants of people who built the wall and garrisoned the wall.
How did you end up having a house there?
Well, I took accompanied a friend of mine, an American, so he came to see me in China. And of course, when somebody comes to China, they need to go to the Great Wall. And so I liked the Mutenyu section of the Great Wall, so we came here. It was a hot summer day, and instead of taking the cableway, we walked down. So by the time we got to the bottom, we were all sweaty and tired. So we sat next to the little path, and not far from us there was a local villager who had a little stall where he was selling trinkets and souvenirs and t-shirts and so forth. And when we sat down, he started talking with us. And I knew he was chatting us up so that we would buy something from his stall. And I told him that I enjoyed chatting with him, but that I wasn't in the market to buy any of his souvenirs. But he kept chatting with me, and I told him that I envied him living in such a beautiful place, and that my dream had been for a long time to have a house at the Great Wall so that I could appreciate this wonder of the world and have a place out in the countryside. And this guy, out of the blue, he said, "I'll help you find a house." This was in the era before there were cell phones. And so I didn't want to give him my business phone number. So I gave him my home phone number so he could contact me after he had found a house for us. And as soon as I left the wall that day, I promptly forgot I'd ever encountered this guy. And so a few days later, I came home in the evening, and my wife says, "Jim, what do you mean you bought a house at the Great Wall?" And I said, "Oh, what do you mean? I didn't buy a house at the Great Wall." And she says, "Well, this peasant called me up this morning, and I really couldn't understand what he was talking about. And he's asking for you, and he's talking about a house. And I thought it was just weird, and you hadn't said anything about it. So I hung up the phone on him. And then a few minutes later, he called back, and I hung up on him again. And finally, the third time that he called, I got the idea. And so then I explained to her, and that he was looking for a place for us, and we eventually came out, and he gave us a selection of houses where he had found that might be available, and we got one of them that was a couple of houses away from his in Mutenyu village. So it's a very fortuitous thing, because if he hadn't been very persistent, if I hadn't run into him that day, if he hadn't offered to help, if he hadn't really looked, if my wife had hung up on him a third time, maybe none of this that has changed my life and given me new opportunities and a lot of joy, it wouldn't have happened. So much of life can be serendipitous. magical, lucky. And that's certainly the way I feel about getting our house in Mutianyu.
At first, the house they acquired was used as a personal holiday home for Jim and his family. He was working for an international company in the city at the time, but had grown sick of all the traveling and the pain of working for a company. And in 2005, he quit and moved out to Mutianyu village full-time. He rebuilt their home and ran his own small consultancy. Sustainability is a wide concept, but mostly when you talk about sustainability, you talk about the environmental aspect and global warming and how to protect our planet. But there's also another aspect, which is a social aspect, a community aspect, a human aspect of sustainability, how we can protect and develop our communities.
I had no idea about starting tourism businesses here. It took the mayor of the village to make a loudspeaker announcement one day, not long after we had started living full-time in the village. It says, Jim Spear, report to the village hall in Chinese, of course. So I trotted right on down to the village hall, and the mayor said, sit down, have a cup of tea, and in case you hadn't noticed, our village is having a really hard time. We've been here for 500 years as a community, but we don't know how we're going to sustain ourselves into the next generation. That was the very first time I ever heard someone express the notion of sustainability of a community. And I was already familiar with sustainability from the perspective of environmental sustainability and trying to make sure that we don't destroy the planet and taking steps in that respect. But there's also a social dimension to sustainability. What does it mean to be fully human? What does it mean to be part of a community? What does it mean to look into the relationship of people and the land that they inhabit? And so the mayor said, look, the population is aging. A lot of the elderly people have no means of support. They're estranged from their children, or they don't have children. And the young people can't find good jobs, so they all leave. And we just don't know how we're going to continue as a community. And he said, we let you live in our village. Don't you think you should give something back? And well, my first response in my mind was, well, no, I don't. I really wrapped up in myself. But he really got me thinking. He just said, we think you should help us. You should start a little business. Nobody else from the outside has ever come here to start a business.
They began in Mutianyu village, and in 2006 they had already located the glazed hair factory in Beijing village, which today is the Brickyard Retreat.
And part of our aspect of social sustainability is by providing jobs so the people can stay and live in their original homes in the village. So about 85% of our employees are right from this village or other nearby villages. And of those 85% who are local employees, every single one of them is a female. They are all farm housewives. Some of them are part-timers, so they can still go home and prepare meals and help take care of their other family responsibilities. And some of them are full-time. And believe me, in a patriarchal society, for the wife to have a full-time job outside of the house and an annual steady income makes a big difference when she gets home with a paycheck in her purse. We're not perfect. We're far from perfect. In my experience in life, the perfect is the enemy of the good enough. Too often, not being perfect becomes an excuse for doing nothing. And today we're faced with the issue of global climate change, and each and every one of us has a responsibility to try to make a difference.